Well, hello, it's Michele Tittler and Gerry Gagnon from Endracebasedlaw. Law. And today's episode, number 2, is background terminology and organizations. And I haven't got a clue what Gerry's going to say, so he's just going to take it over and explain it to all of us because nobody in Canada seems to know what's going on with these race laws. Hit it, Ger.
Okay, Michelle. I thought it appropriate to start at the most fundamental level because we get confused by what's going on and how complex it's gotten. Never mind the average Canadian who just catches the occasional news story. Now, one thing that has happened over time is the terminology in this discussion, the labels, if it were, have been altered and radically altered from the original discussions. So if you if you read older material, even 30 years ago, 25 years ago, the terms used for what we're now referring to, unfortunately, as indigenous people, the word doesn't exist. Well, let's start with the Constitution, the original Constitution written in 1867. They are in the Constitution as Indians. That is the legal constitutional term for the people who were referred to in the original BNA Act. The term Aboriginal was added by the Supreme Court later on in their court decisions, and then incorporated in a Supreme Court decision where they defined for Canadians who they thought Aboriginals should be. And it turned out it wasn't just Indians anymore. Now there were the Inuit in Canada's Arctic, who were never referred to constitutionally before. And then in a later Supreme Court decision, the people who used to be referred to as half-breeds, the mixed race Aboriginals, but only the ones who identified with the Métis Nation, the original Louis Riel Métis Nation. And we'll do a post on that whole topic at another point in time. They were also added under the category of Aboriginal. So the 1982 Constitution refers to Aboriginals and their rights and expands their rights. And Aboriginals as defined now as Indians, Inuit, and Métis. And so the classification grows and grows and grows over time, thanks to our courts, all supported by our parliament. Okay, so in there, as well now, we have the term First Nations. First Nations does not exist in the Constitution. It does not exist in any historical documentation. It does not exist in any of the writings on the topic as recently as, say, 40 years ago. They were referred to as small N nations every once in a while in 1867 era documents. And the larger tribes, like the Iroquois, had confederated 6 tribes into what they called the Iroquois Nation.
They were a nation.
And so they were referred to as a nation. But the term now is applied, for instance, in BC, we have the Popcom First Nation, which includes 14 people.
May I jump in here? This is also a misappropriation of our language because you cannot have 600 plus 600 plus firsts. Okay, they're First Nations, but there's 600 plus of them. Well, which one of them are first? You can only have one first. It's a misappropriation of the word first and of the word nation. Like it's really crazy.
Yes, and it should be pointed out that although certain groups like the Mohawks have tried to get recognized internationally as a nation and have even tried using their own passports, Palestine recognized their passport, the Palestinian Authority. The United Nations doesn't recognize any of these so-called nations as nations, but the government of Canada now does. And when they have negotiations with these people, it's called nation-to-nation negotiations, as if we're negotiating with people who aren't Canadians.
Yeah.
Okay, you got to understand, and believe me, a lot of the
enemy within.
the Aboriginal leadership looks at it that way. That's exactly their goal, is to have a politically and legally separate nation that's supported by the people of Canada financially. Okay, so when you see the term Indigenous, for instance, that's a United Nations creation, that term. And it refers to people like the Brazilian tribes that they discover deep in the jungle, who are living completely 2,000 years ago. Okay? Those are Indigenous people. They're practicing an Indigenous lifestyle. Most Canadian Indigenous people have no connection to an Indigenous lifestyle any longer. Over half of them live out of reserves. They live in our cities. They're not hunting and gathering in downtown Vancouver. And so these terms, First Nation and Indigenous, have been created by what we refer to as the Aboriginal industry. When that term was created and popularized by people like Francis Whittleson, it was called the Indian industry, because that's before we added in the Inuit and we added in the Métis, and suddenly it became...
We're making it law. It's race law. That's why we're called endracebased law.
The courts expanded the term to Aboriginal to incorporate that, and we refer to the Aboriginal industry. The Aboriginal industry, which we'll again be doing a separate show on, but it includes the lawyers, the chiefs, the academics in the universities, all of the people getting government jobs because of their race.
It's an industry.
It's a $1 billion industry. And we're going to do a separate podcast on some of the costs. Like, it is billions, not just billions.
And then taking
anymore.
over the education system, and all they really taught was hatred for whites and how whites were everything. Anybody with white skin from Europe were all bad. They're all bad. They're all bad. And they did this to the natives, who are all good, all good.
Now, when these negotiations nation to nation happen, sometimes they're with an individual tribe over land claims, etc., or other issues. But there are national organizations that most of the negotiating is done with. Most of you are probably familiar with the Assembly of First Nations, another group that changed their name and put in First Nations to comply.
Assembly of First Nations.
Now, the Assembly of First Nations is all of the... It's an agreed upon voluntary organization. It does not represent all Aboriginals or all, in this case, First Nations. They're only concerned with Indians, the Assembly of First Nations. And you have to join. Most chiefs have joined. Most reserve Aboriginals seem to consider it the prime gravy train, that the corruption on with their own chiefs and councils is tied in through the AFN. Assembly of First Nations. And you'll notice when we use terms like the Assembly of First Nations on our pages, there's usually this around First Nations, and there's usually this around Indigenous. Okay, that's to show that these terms aren't quite what they pretend to be, that they are political terms.
Well, you'll notice that Indigenous people from Europe are not recognized.
And now why I put on my glasses is because I can't remember all of the national organizations that now exist in this billion-dollar industry, and I've had to write out some names here.
Oh my goodness, go
for instance, with the AFN only represents reserve Indians.
Oh, really?
Okay, and the chiefs.
I never knew that.
And all of the people who live off reserve, which is now the majority of Aboriginals, they have to fight even to get to vote. Because most of the tribes make it so you have to come back to the reserve to vote.
Right.
You can't do remote voting. And so there's a litany of complaints from off-reserve Aboriginals that finally resulted in them creating what's called the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples. So when you see CAP, the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples, well, it doesn't represent all Aboriginal peoples. It represents specifically off-reserve Indians. That's it.
Okay.
Okay, so what does that leave out? Well, that leaves out the women's organization.
Oh yeah, you gotta have the women's, and then you gotta have the transgender organization.
The Aboriginal Women's Organization, who felt
Just kidding, although that's coming.
And rightfully felt that the chiefs and the AFN were somewhat misogynistic in their cultural approach to women. and Aboriginal women were not getting fairly represented by this national organization. So now there is an organization for Aboriginal women. Okay?
Excellent.
And then there's the National Youth Council. Now, the National Youth Council only represents youth who are off reserve.
Yeah, you got to get the Nazi youth movement in there.
There is no organization for the youth who need it the most, which is the youth on the reserves. And probably the reason for that is it's so dysfunctional. Like they couldn't put together. A lot of the off-reserve youth are going to university and stuff, so they can put together an organization to represent their interests. So the government's got a deal. If they leave any one of these out in negotiations, the result is a court case. They go to court saying, see, we were left out of this, and they have a duty to consult us.
Fiduciary
and
responsibility.
The taxpayers pay for both sides of the court case. And,
all across Canada.
And the penalties, the financial penalties that result. And we're not done yet, because you notice we haven't touched yet upon the Inuit. The Inuit have a national organization called the Inuit Tapirit Kanatami.
I saw this coming.
Tapirit Kanatami. Now, the Inuit women felt that organization was somewhat sexist and unrepresentative.
Yeah, for sure.
And so they formed the Pauk Tuutit Inuit Women of Canada organization.
Excellent, good for them.
Okay,
good for them.
So the government now has to take all of this into account. And then, of course, we get now to the Métis. Now, since there was no clear, and the Supreme Court said when they included Métis as Aboriginals, that there's no firm legal definition of what constitutes a Métis. Now, what's happened over succeeding court cases, etc., is it was basically decided if you could prove a link to Métis who were part of the Riel Rebellion, which was the so-called original Métis Nation, which was in Manitoba and part of Saskatchewan. If you could prove you were part of that, then you'd be considered Métis, and you're eligible for the government benefits that come along with being Aboriginal.
It's racism to
which,
the
again,
maximum degree.
It's getting expanded, which it had to. We predicted this when we started 11 years ago, that this was going to just keep unraveling into an unholy mess.
Yep.
And that's what we've got now. And so the Métis National Council is attempting to, well, the government recognizes that anyone they determine is Métis, the government will accept as Métis. And that leaves a lot of room for funny business. And it's probably the reason why in Saskatchewan, for instance, there's two Métis organizations that fight over who actually represents the Métis and who argue with the national Métis organization about who they should be representing and who they aren't, et cetera, et cetera.
They're all fighting each other over the land,
And
too.
then, as in addition, as in what we've seen with both the Indians and the Inuit, the women, Métis women, felt that they weren't being represented. And so now we have the women of the Métis Nation organization.
You have to do that.
Now, these are just the national organizations. Provincially, and
I've been holding that laugh in the whole time.
I'm sorry.
Well, this is the reason why we're called endrace-based law.
And if you wonder why no federal politician wants the Indigenous file, wants to be Minister of Indigenous
No,
Rights.
you say anything against them and you were just like, whoa.
Oh, you don't have to say anything.
Yeah, you're cancel culture.
Each of
We've
these
been
groups,
through it.
each of these groups is going to be in almost daily contact with you about something.
Yeah, we've been attacked like it's incredible how we've been attacked.
We can't keep up with just the daily news stories because now, of course, besides the federal government, who are the only ones supposed to be caring for Aboriginals. That's what our Constitution, only the federal government has the power to look after Aboriginals. In the original 1867 BNA Act, they are treated as wards of the state. Now, any of you familiar with that term knows that means somebody who can't care for themselves, whether a child or a disabled person. And the sick aspect of that, that's such a racist designation, is it's still there in our Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
It is the foundation of all the other constitutional stuff and the laws that Parliament has passed. The Indian Act is based on that clause in the Constitution.
Now they were behind the times. They didn't even have the wheel, and so there were people who, in the end, natives themselves will complain about that, and at the same time, be all in for the money and the programs and all the lawfare.
It's what we refer to as do-gooder racism. Mm-hmm. That's what our ancestors. If you read the comments from that time,
yeah, do-gooder racism.
They wanted to protect the Aboriginals. Okay, they saw. At least the liberals of the time, the progressives of the time, saw the Aboriginals were collapsing in the face of modernity, that they were starving in some cases. They were lost. And so this was done, again, with good intentions, but to declare a whole race as children that need the government's protection and care forever, and not having altered it, matter of fact, built on it up to now.
And here's the irony, Gerry, because they will say, oh, the treaties, they don't honor the treaties. They'll say honor the treaties, and then when you go back and you read the actual text of the treaties and what they really say, you realize that land was ceded, and then they say, oh, the chiefs didn't understand, and we need to bring them into the modern day.
That's called now the spirit of the treaties rather than the wording of the treaties. Anyway, that'll be a whole other episode.
It's called Indian giving.
It'll be more than one episode.
Indian giving.
The treaties. We've done dozens of posts. Now, I should point out any of these topics, whether it's the terminology, whether it's this stuff we're just talking about now, whether it's the constitutional references we're referring to, you can go to either .ca or .com.
Yeah.
And they both have their own posts. Okay, .ca is the bigger post that will on the big questions like we're talking about today, and or .com, sorry.
.com.
.com is the major post.
.com is feature stories. He does long, in-depth, because there's history involved in all this, right?
And .ca is more of the ongoing news stories that occur.
The court cases and all the
But all of the posts have links to our previous posts on the same topic, so you can start virtually anywhere. Just go to the categories, pick a topic you're looking for, and then a post, and at the bottom of the post will be other posts relating to that post you just read.
And Gerry's the leading expert on this subject.
We have done hundreds of posts on this by now.
He has.
And so we're looking forward to interacting with you in the future. We're going to have live broadcasts and the ability to contact us.
You have to learn a little bit so you can start asking questions.
We already have the ability for you to contact us via email if you have questions.
So gerryforcanada@gmail.com or Proton Mail, but Gmail's he'll get to that faster. gerryforcanada@gmail. And Michele for Canada @gmail. Those are the quickest ways. We've created those just for people to contact us. But we have to have a conversation about this, because here's the thing. There's a strange, this is extremely anti-Indigenous European people. Like, it's really anti-European, but now we have a lot of different cultures and races and ethnicities here in Canada. And I mean, why are they responsible? Why is everyone responsible for this? This is a $1 billion industry. Why are we doing this?
Okay.
So I think that's about where we're at. Now we're going to say goodbye to this one and move on to the next.
Yes, we're going to try to not cover everything every time we do a podcast. We'll try to keep it focused on.
Yeah, I think we're
it's
almost
a huge,
at 20 minutes
huge
now.
topic.
I think that's a really good time because
Yes.
People are busy, and this is a really heavy subject. So we're going to try to condense it and just keep it full of
Thank you to
information.
those who watch this and take
you.
it seriously. It definitely needs to be taken much more seriously than it currently is.
Yeah, it really does. It's destroying Canada, and it's divisive, and it's racist.
And embarrassing.
Okay. And embarrassing. Good job, Jar. Okay, goodbye, everyone.